Hello, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, wherever you guys are. Hello, 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 hello. Alright, very last minute because I pretty much slept the whole day and I just really wanted to sleep. And I don't really get a chance to sleep in a lot lately. So, I decided to sleep first. Prioritize sleeping before anything else. Anyways, welcome to my stream. Um, um, yeah. Hope everyone is doing okay. Um, yeah, I think I'll be. I really should have done this earlier today, but like I said, I was sleeping a lot, and I think I deserve to sleep, basically. Anyway, today, today, we are continuing our reading of "Sore Kara" by Natsume Sōseki. Um, it is a very deceptively long book. It seems like pretty average book length, average amount of pages, but because the typeface was so small, not so small, it's pretty average as well, but it's like smaller than average, and the words are all pretty much jammed together in a paragraph, and the paragraph is very long. So turns out that the book is much longer than I expected. What was supposed to be probably a uh, three times reading, three reading session turns into much longer than I expected. But you know what? It's fine because more content, right? Um, I'm really trying not to read too fast. I'm really trying not to read too fast because I tend to garble out words together when I do read too fast, and English is not my first language, so I do try my best to read properly. Alright, I think without further ado, without much dilly dallying, let's continue reading. Um, Thank you so much, whoever's on the stream, whoever's hanging out with me. You don't really have to be in this room. It's just a space for me to be in, where it is completely devoid of distraction. And also, I haven't been inside this room for a long time, and I really like the way I designed it. Yep. Yeah, I was at the basement for a little bit. I decided to come in here for a little change. Okay, one sip of tea, and then we're gonna begin chapter 13 of Natsume Sōseki, Sore Kara, and then alright, let's go. You ready? Sorry, I just blow my nose a little bit. Alright, let's go. Alright, let's go. Today we are continuing to read. Okay, this is a good angle. Okay, okay. Alright, today we are continuing to read Sore Kara and then by Natsume Sōseki, chapter 13. Chapter 13. Let's go. Some 4 days later, Daisuke went on his father's orders to see Takagi off at Shimbashi Station. Perhaps it was because he had been roused early that morning after too little sleep and then had let the wind toss his sleepy head. But by the time he arrived at the station, he felt that he might have caught a cold. No sooner had he stepped into the waiting room than Umeko advised him that he looked unwell. Daisuke removed his hat without answering and clapped his wet head from time to time. In the end, his hair, so neatly parted in the morning, became completely rumpled. On the platform, Takagi suddenly turned to Daisuke and said, "How about it? Why not take this train and come for a visit to Kobe?" Daisuke only answered, "Thank you." Just as the train was about to leave, Umeko made a point of approaching the window and calling Sagawa's daughters by name, said, "Do be sure to come again soon." From the other side of the window, the young lady bowed politely, but on this side of the glass, no words could be discerned. When the train had gone, the four left the ticket area and went their separate ways. Umeko tried to take Daisuke back to Aoyama, but Daisuke clapped his head and refused. He took a rickshaw straight to Ushigome, and as soon as he arrived, went directly into his study and fell on his back. Kadono came out to check on him, but knowing Daisuke's ways and said nothing and left after picking up the cloak flung over the chair. As he lay, Daisuke wondered what would have happened in his immediate future. If he left things as they were, he would end up having to accept this match. He had refused quite a number of them already. If he rejected this one in addition to all the others, it seems likely that the family would either give up on him in disgust or become seriously angry. If they were to give up pressing a wife on him, nothing could be better, but to have them get seriously angry with him would be highly inconvenient. On the other hand, it seemed stupid for a modern man to accept something he did not want. Daisuke wondered in the midst of this dilemma. Unlike his father, Daisuke was not the old-fashioned sort who began with a plan and then tried to force nature to conform to it. This was because he believed nature to be greater than any plan fabricated by man. For his father to force him to run counter to his own nature and do his bidding was the same as an abandoned wife's waving the letter of divorce as proof of her married state. But Daisuke had not the slightest intention of confronting his father with such an argument. To attack his father with logic was the most difficult of undertakings. Furthermore, even if he were to risk the difficulty, he stood to gain nothing. The result would only be to invite his father's displeasure, and would be no different from rejecting the match without giving a reason. Of his father, brother, and sister-in-law, Daisuke had the greatest doubt about his father's character. He went so far as to guess that even in the case of the current match, the marriage itself was not his father's sole objective. But of course, he had not been afforded an opportunity to determine precisely where his father's motives lay. He did not think it immoral that he, a son, should speculate in this way on his father's intention. Nor did he for a moment consider himself particularly unfortunate as a son. It was just that he found it disagreeable that the gulf between them was likely to widen more than ever on account of this. At one extreme of their rift lay the possibility of disinheritance. Daisuke tried to imagine the situation. He recognized that some anguish would attend upon it, but not so much as to be unbearable. He was rather more fearful of the cessation of funds that would ensue. Daisuke had always maintained that man was finished when potatoes become more important than him than diamonds. If he brought his father's wrath upon himself, and if the worst came true and their financial ties were both broken, then he would have to abandon the diamond and gnaw at the potato. All that would be left in compensation was a love that came naturally to him, and the object of that love was another man's wife. He thought he thought and thought as he lay, but no matter how much time elapsed, his mind would not arrive at anything. Just as he did not have the right to determine his lifespan, so he could not determine his future. But just as he could make certain estimates about his life and about his lifespan, so he could also perceive certain shadows in his future. He dallied at trying to capture these shadows. At moments like these, Daisuke's brain only flitted with fantasies like bats that startled at the night. As he lay chasing the light of their beating wings, his head seemed to lift from the floor, becoming buoyant. Before he knew it, he fell into a light sleep. Suddenly, someone sounded a bell in his ear. Daisuke awoke even before the thought of fire crossed his mind. However, he did not spring up. He simply continued to lie. It was almost normal for such sounds to appear in his dreams. At times, the echoing persisted even after he was awake. 5 or 6 nights ago, his sleep had been shattered by the awareness that the house was shaking violently. At the time, his shoulders, hips, and part of his back was clearly felt the floor. Part of his back had clearly felt the floor move. It also happened frequently that the throbbing of his heart, which he had felt in a dream, would carry over in wakefulness. On such occasions, he would place his hand on his chest and saint-like lie with his gaze turned to the ceiling. Daisuke lay waiting for the bell to finish buzzing deep in his ear. Then he got up. Sorry. Well, sorry. Then he got up. When he went to the morning room, he found that his tray had been covered. And sorry, one moment, please. When he went into the morning room, he found that his tray had been covered and left next to the brazier. The clock pointed past 12. The woman must have finished her meal. She was in the maid's room, nodding away with her elbow leaning on the rice pot. Kadono was nowhere to be seen. Daisuke went to the bathroom, wet his head, and returned to his tray. He finished a lonely meal and went back to his study. That day, for the first time in a long while, he felt like looking at some of his books. He opened at the bookmarker a Western book that he had once begun, and he discovered that he could make no connection with what had come before. Such a lapse of memory was rather unusual for Daisuke. Since his student days, he had been something of a reader. Now he prided himself on his situation that, free from the cares of food and shelter, allowed him, even after the graduation, to reap as he pleased the benefits of various subscriptions. If he let one day pass without glancing at a single page, habit led him to feel a vague sense of decay. Therefore, in the face of most intrusions, he tried to arrange it so that he could stay in touch with the printed word. There were moments when he felt that books constituted his only legitimate province. Daisuke puffed absently on his cigarette and flipped back 2 or 3 pages that he had already read. He had to struggle somewhat to focus his mind on the arguments and the sequence in which they were presented. The effort required for this was not as trifling as that for moving from a barge onto the wharf. It was more like puzzling over a piece of block that would not fit and being forced to move on to another piece with the first still out of place. Even so, Daisuke persevered, and kept his eyes on the pages for some 2 hours. Finally, he could stand it no longer. True, as a collection of prints, the words projected a certain meaning on his mind, but they showed no no signs of circulating in his flesh and blood. He felt unsatisfied, as if he had bit into ice cream outside the ice bag. He turned to the book face down. He turned the book face down. He decided that it was impossible to read under such circumstances. He also felt that he could no longer rest peacefully. His anguish was not the usual ennui. It was not that he was too listless to do anything. His mind was now in a state in which he could not bear not to do something. He went to the morning room and threw on the cloak that had been folded. Then he put on the clogs that he had kicked off in the entranceway and all but ran out the gate. It was about 4 o'clock. He went down Kagurazaka and with no destination in mind took the first streetcar he saw. Asked by the conductor where he was going, he blurted out wherever came to mind. When he opened his billfold, he discovered, buried deep in the fold, was what was left of the travel money that he had given to Michio. Daisuke bought his ticket and counted the bills that remained. He passed the night in a certain tea house in Akasaka. There he heard an interesting story. A young and beautiful woman had relations with a certain man and came to harbor the consequences. When it was time for the birth, she shed sorrowful tears. Later, when asked why, she replied that at her age she felt miserable at having to bear a child. The period of love's supremacy had all been too brief, and in the merciless with which parenthood had fallen on her young head, the woman had caught a glimpse of life's transiency. She was, needless to say, not a respectable woman. Daisuke found the story extremely interesting, the insight that it provided into psychology of a woman who had dedicated herself exclusively to the beauty of flesh and love of the soul without reflecting upon anything else. The next day, Daisuke finally went to see Michio. He was going because he was worried about whether Michio had told Hiraoka about the money of the other day, and if so, what effect this had had on the couple. This, at least, was the excuse that he made to himself. He decided that it was this worry that had harried him and kept him from enjoying a moment's peace, and now, having dragged him to the ends of the earth, was blowing him right against Michio. Before leaving the house, Daisuke freshened his spirits by changing from the underwear and unlined kimono that he had worn the night before. Outside, it was time of the day, and the mercury climbed higher with each passing day. As he walked, the sun shone so brightly that he actually longed for a damp rainy season. Daisuke, as a reaction to the previous night, was oppressed by his own black shadow falling in the cheerful air. From beneath his broad-brimmed summer hat, he wished that the rainy season would begin quickly. It was only 2 or 3 days away. His head, as if to forecast its coming, was dull and heavy. When he finally stood before Hiraoka's house, his hair, which formed a thick covering of his cloudy head, was hot and damp. Daisuke removed his hat before going in. The grating was locked. Hearing noises, he followed them to the back, where he found Michio fooling cloth with the maid. Still bent over, she leaned her slender neck from the middle of the folding board, which was propped against the side of the storage shed, and resting the hand that had been painstakingly stretching the wrinkled cloth, looked at Daisuke. At first, she did not say anything. Daisuke also stood silent for a moment. Finally, when he said, "I've come again," Michio shook her wet hand and went into the kitchen door almost in a run. At the same time, she signaled to him that with her eyes to come around to the front. She came out to the stepping stone to open the lock and explain, "Because it's unsafe." Her pale cheeks were flushed from walking in the clear sunny air. The color faded into her usual pallor towards the hairline, where a thin layer of sweat gleamed. Daisuke watched Michio's almost transparent skin and waited quietly for the door to open. "I'm sorry to keep you waiting," Michio said, and as if to draw him in, moved aside one step. Daisuke almost brushed against her as he went in. Inside, he found a purple cushion placed properly before Hiraoka's desk. Seeing it, Daisuke felt a tinge of distaste. In the garden, where the unworked earth gleamed yellow, long unsightly grass was growing. As he offered some commonplace apology about disturbing her again when she was busy, Daisuke stared at the tasteless garden. Then the thought came to him that it was unkind to leave Michiyo in such a house. Michiyo folded her hands on her lap. The fingertips were slightly swollen from working in the water. She said that she had been fooling cloth because she was bored. By being bored, Michiyo meant that with her husband out all the time, the tedious hours of housekeeping hung heavy on her hands. Daisuke deliberately teased, "What a fine position!" But Michiyo was not evoking the dreariness in her heart to appeal to him. Silently she stood and went into the next room. She rattled the handles of Western-style chests of drawers and came out with a red velvet-covered box. She sat before Daisuke and opened it. Inside was the ring Daisuke had given her a long time ago. "It's all right, isn't it?" she said, as if in apology, then got up and went back to the next room. There, as if in deference to society, she furtively returned the keepsake to its place and came back to her seat. Daisuke said nothing about the ring. Looking at the garden, he said, "If you've got so much time on your hands, why don't you weed the garden?" It was Michiyo's turn to fall silent. When this had lasted some minutes, Daisuke asked again, "Did you tell Hiraoka about it?" In a low voice, Michiyo answered, "No." "Then he doesn't know yet?" he asked back. Michiyo's explanation was that she had meant to tell him, but Hiraoka was never home long enough these days, and she had just let the time slip by without letting him know. Daisuke, of course, did not question the truth of her explanation. It was something that would have required only 5 minutes to tell. He could not help feeling that for Michiyo to have let the matter go on for so long, there was something weighing on her mind, and that made it difficult for her to tell Hiraoka. And he thought that he had made Michiyo a guilty woman before Hiraoka. But this did not wound Daisuke's conscience all too deeply, for he also felt that whatever the verdict of the law, Hiraoka would clearly share in the censure dealt by nature. Daisuke tried to sound out Michiyo on Hiraoka's recent behavior. As usual, Michiyo was reluctant to say much, but it was clear that Hiraoka's conduct towards his wife had changed since their marriage. Daisuke had already seen as much when the couple returned from Kyoto. Since then, he had never explicitly asked the two about their feelings, but it seemed indisputable that each day their relationship deteriorated with increasing speed. If this estrangement had come about because he, a third person, had come between the couple, then Daisuke might have been more careful in his conduct. But when he appealed to his reason, he could not believe that this was the case. Daisuke traced part of the current state of affairs to Michiyo's illness, judging that the change of the physical relationship had had an emotional effect upon the husband. He traced yet another to the death of their child. Other factors were Hiraoka's dissipations and his failure as a company employee. And finally, Daisuke traced to the last part of financial situation resulting from Hiraoka's dissipation. When all was summarized, he concluded that Hiraoka had taken a wife that he should not have taken, and Michiyo had married a man that she should not have married. Daisuke sorely regretted having responded to Hiraoka's request and interceded on his behalf. But he simply could not think that it was because he, Daisuke, had stirred his wife's heart that Hiraoka was drifting from her. At the same time, he could not deny outright that the couple's present relationship constituted a necessary condition of the growth of his love for Michiyo. Leaving aside for a moment that the question of the extent to their relationship had developed before Michiyo was married to Hiraoka, Daisuke was certainly incapable of remaining indifferent to her now. He found the Michiyo who had been stricken with illness more piteous than the old Michio. He found the Michio who had lost her child more piteous than the old Michio. He found the Michio who suffered from the difficulties of eking out an existence of more piteous than the old Michio. But Daisuke was not so bold as to make a direct attempt to sever for good the bond between the couple. His love was not that blind. Michio's immediate suffering stemmed from financial difficulties. Her in, her intimidations, her intimations made it clear that Hiraoka was not giving her what he could for household expenses. Daisuke thought that, as a start, he could at least do something about that. So he said, "I'll get together with Hiraoka and see if I can talk to him." Michio turned to him with a lonely expression on her face, knowing all too well that it would be fine if things went well, but if he failed, it would only be worse for Michio. Daisuke did not press the point. Michio got up again and brought a letter from the next room. The letter was in a pale blue envelope. It had been addressed to Michio by her father in Hokkaido. Michio pulled the long letter from the envelope and handed it to Daisuke. The letter described in detail the unsatisfactory conditions there, the high prices that made life difficult, the uncertainty of being without family or relations, and his desire to come to Tokyo if something could be arranged. Everything in it was plaintive. Daisuke rolled the letter carefully and handed it to Michio. She was holding back her tears. Michio's father had once owned enough rice fields and rice paddies to be known something of a wealthy man. At the time of the Russo-Japanese War, he had followed the urgings of a friend to dabble in stock market. He failed completely, manfully sold all the property inherited from his ancestors and went to Hokkaido. This was first news Daisuke had had of him since then. As for their relations, Michio's dead brother had often told Daisuke that they might as well not exist. In effect, Michio could count only on her father and Hiraoka. "I envy you," she said, blinking. Daisuke lacked the courage to deny her words. After a pause, she asked, "Why haven't you found a wife yet?" Daisuke could not respond to this question either. As he silently gazed at Michio's face, the blood slowly drained from her cheeks until they were even more pale than usual. Then for the first time, Daisuke realized the danger of remaining yet another minute before her. Their words, flowing from natural sympathy, had driven them on, and it was only a matter of 2 or 3 minutes before they would be pushed beyond the bounds fixed by society. Daisuke was of course equipped with the conversation that even if they went further, would allow him to retreat as if nothing had happened. He had always wondered at a conversation recorded in Western novels. For him, they were too bald, too self-indulgent, and moreover, too subtly rich. However they read in the original, he thought they reflected a taste that could not be translated into Japanese. Therefore, he had not the slightest intention of using imported phrases to develop his relationship with Michio. Between the two of them, at least, ordinary words sufficed perfectly well. But the danger of slipping from point A to point B without realizing it. Daisuke managed to stand his ground only by hair's breadth. When he left, Michio saw him to the entranceway and said, to come again, please. It's so lonely." In the back, the maid was still fulling cloth. Once outside, Daisuke walked unsteadily about 100 yards. He could not have been relieved at having left just in time, but his heart knew no satisfaction. Nor, in the other hand, did he regret not having stayed with Michio, said all that nature commanded. He remembered that whether he broke off then or 5 or 10 minutes later amounted to the same thing in the end. He remembered that his present relationship was already established the last time he saw her. No, it was even before then. As Daisuke retraced their paths, There was no point at which he could not see the flaming torch of their love. Michio was in effect married to him when she married Hiraoka. When he had pushed his thoughts this far, Daisuke felt as if something unbearably heavy had been thrown into his heart. His feet faltered under the weight. When he got home, Kadono asked, "You look very pale. Is something the matter?" Daisuke went to the bathroom and wiped the sweat off his pale brow. Then he soaked his overgrown hair in the cold water. For some 2 days after that, Daisuke did not leave the house at all. In the afternoon of the third day, he got on the streetcar and visited Hiraoka at the newspaper office. He had resolved to see him and have a thorough talk with him on Michio's behalf. He gave his card to the office boy. While he waited in the dusty reception area, he frequently took his handkerchief from his sleeve and covered his nose. Presently she was shown to a drawing room on the second floor. It was a stuffy, hot, gloomy, cramped room. Daisuke had a cigarette. A door marked editorial swung open and shut to admit a steady stream of people. It was from this door that Hiraoka presently emerged. He was wearing the same summer suit that he had worn the last time. As usual, his collar and cuffs were impeccable. "Well, haven't seen you in a while." He sounded hurried as he stood before Daisuke. Daisuke also felt compelled to stand. The two spoke briefly. Daisuke had come just at a time when there was a good deal of editing to be done, and it was impossible for Hiraoka to get away for any length of time. Daisuke asked when it would be more convenient for him. Hiraoka took his watch from his pocket and said, "Sorry, but would you mind coming back in another hour?" Daisuke took his hat and went down the dark, dusty stairs once more. Outside, there was at least a cool breeze. Daisuke wandered aimlessly about the neighborhood. He mulled over how he should broach his subject once he was with Hiraoka. His objective was to gain immediate peace of mind for Michio, however little it might amount to, but he was afraid that he would end up irritating Hiraoka instead. He even anticipated that the explosion that could occur as the worst possible consequence, yet he had no plans for saving Michio in case of such outcome. He lacked the courage to let their relationship develop further with their mutual acknowledgement. At the same time, he could not bear not doing anything for her. Today's meeting, therefore, was not so much a prudent stratagem developed by his reason as an adventure spun out of whirlwinds of emotion. This was something new to Daisuke, something of which he himself was still unaware. 1 hour later, he stood again before the door marked editorial. With Hiraoka, he went out the gates of the newspaper office. When they had gone 3 or 4 blocks down the street side, Hiraoka stepped ahead and entered a certain house. A wreath of hare's foot fern hung on the east of the room, and a narrow garden glistened with sprinkled water. Hiraoka took off his jacket and immediately crossed his legs. Daisuke did not think that it was that hot. For him, it sufficed to have a fan in his hand. Their conversation began with a description of the internal conditions of the newspaper office. Hiraoka said that it seemed busy, and yet it was a good job, quite relaxing. His tone did not suggest that he was simply trying to conceal a sense of failure. Daisuke teased that Hiraoka liked the job because it was an irresponsible business. Hiraoka became serious and began to defend the profession. He explained that there was no other business today that was as competitive or demanded as much shrewdness. "True. It's probably not enough just to be a good writer." Daisuke showed no sign of being especially impressed. "I'm only in charge of the financial section, but even there, interesting things come up. Maybe I'll do a little story on the side effects of your family's company." Given his long-standing observation, Daisuke was not to be caught off guard with such a remark. "It might be interesting to do that. Only keep it fair, will you?" "Naturally. I don't intend to print lies." "No, I mean that your muckraking should be directed impartially at everyone, not just my brother's company. Hiraoka laughed maliciously. It's no fun just to stop with that Japan sugar incident, he said pointedly. Daisuke drank his sake silently. Their conversation seemed to be losing momentum. Then suddenly, on some impulse, Hiraoka launched into an anecdote that he seemed to think that was related to the state of affairs in the business world. It was about an incident that had occurred in the Okuma company during the Sino-Japanese War. The Okuma company had been charged with the delivery of more than several hundred heads of cattle to the army in Hiroshima. Every day they delivered a certain number and by night stole a few back. And the next day they would redeliver the same cattle. The officials were buying the same cows every day. Finally, they realized what was happening and branded the cows they had bought. The company unknowingly brought back the same cows on the following day and thus was exposed at last. When he heard this story, Daisuke thought that, insofar as it dealt with actual society, it afforded a taste of modern comedy. Hiraoka went on to tell of how the government feared a socialist named Kotoku Shosui. 2 or 3 policemen stood on guard at his house, night and day. At one point they even put up a tent and watched him from there. When Shosui went out, the police followed him. If they ever lost sight of him, it was a major event. He showed up in Hongo, now he's in Kanda. The telephones rang all over Tokyo and the commotion were enormous. The police station in Shinjuku spent 100 yen a month on Shosui alone. When one of his group, a candy maker, sat on the street making his candy, the white-clad policeman kept getting in his way. The story also failed to strike a serious note in Daisuke's ear. It's just an example of modern comedy, isn't it? Hiraoka repeated Daisuke's last assessment to challenge him. Daisuke said it was and laughed. Not only was he uninterested in such stories, but today he had not come to exchange small talk as usual. So he let the topic of socialism slide. For some reason, when Hiraoka had wanted to call a geisha, he had restrained him, though with difficulty. To tell you the truth, I wanted to talk with you about something, Daisuke said at last. Hiraoka's manner changed suddenly, and with uneasy eyes on Daisuke, he came out with the unexpected words. I've been meaning to do something about it for a long time, but as things are now, there's nothing I can do. Just wait a little more. In exchange, you see, I haven't written about your father and your brother. Daisuke was taken aback. He did not find the response silly so much as odious. You have changed quite a bit, haven't you? He said coldly. I've changed as much as you have. What can you do? I'm jaded. Anyway, just wait a little more. Hiraoka laughed unnaturally. Daisuke decided that regardless of Hiraoka's word, he himself would say what he had come to say. If he were to explain that he had not come to press him on the matter of the loan, Hiraoka was sure to try to get the upper hand again. Daisuke found that prospect irritating and so let the misunderstanding lie. Instead, he prepared to launch his campaign. But there was an immediate stumbling block. If he started out by saying that he had learned of Michio's budgetary problems stemmed from her, then she would be inconvenienced. Yet, if the discussion failed to touch on the point, all his warnings and suggestions would be quite useless. Daisuke chose to detour. You must be getting quite familiar with places like this. Everyone here seems to know you. My wallet isn't as fat as yours, so it's nothing grand. I can't help it. Have to keep up my social ties after all. Hiraoka dexterously lifted his sake cup to his lips. This may be none of my business, but with all this, can you manage to make ends meet at home? It was a determined thrust on Daisuke's part. Oh, I manage one way or another. Hiraoka had suddenly dropped his tone. His answer was half-hearted. Daisuke could make no further inroads, he ended up asking, "You must normally be home by now. You seemed to be quite late the night I visited." Still evasive, Hiraoka said, "Sometimes I am and sometimes I'm not. I can't help it. It's the nature of the job." His ambiguity seemed to be half in self-defense. "Michio-san must be lonely." "No, she's alright. She's changed a lot." With these words, Hiraoka looked at Daisuke. Daisuke sensed a strange fear in those eyes. Perhaps the couple's relationship was already beyond repair, he thought. If they were to be split asunder by nature's axe, then fate held an ineluctable future before his own eyes. The wider the rift between the two became, the closer he and Michio would be forced together. Daisuke blurted out as if on impulse, "That can't be true. Oh, even if she changed, it's only that she's older. Try to get home regularly so Michio-san will feel a little easier." "Is that what you think?" Hiraoka took a swig. "Is that what I think? But anyone would think so." Daisuke was saying whatever came to mind. "Do you think Michio's the same Michio as 3 years ago?" "She's changed quite a lot. Yes, quite a lot." Hiraoka took another swig. Daisuke felt his heart throb in spite of himself. "She's the same. As far as I can tell, she's exactly the same. She hasn't changed one bit. But even when I do go home, it's not especially pleasant, so what can I do?" "That can't be." Hiraoka looked wide-eyed at Daisuke. Daisuke's breathing became a little constricted, but he did not in the least feel like a sinner struck by lightning. He was saying illogical things on impulse, unlike his usual self, but he never doubted for a moment that he was doing this for the sake of the man seated before him. Half consciously, he was making a last attempt to restore the Hiraoka couple, to what they had been 3 years ago, and on the strength of that, to fling himself forever from Michio. He never once thought of it as a deceptive maneuver to blind Hiraoka to his relationship with Michio. Daisuke regarded himself too highly to behave in such dubious manner. Presently, he returned to his normal tone. "If you are always out like this, it's natural that you would need money. Then the family budget gets tight, and things get less and less pleasant at home." Hiraoka rolled his white shirt sleeve midway up his arms and said, Home isn't much to be thankful for. It seems that the only people who take home seriously are bachelors like you." At these words, Daisuke found Hiraoka hateful. If he were to have spoken his mind candidly, he would have said outright, "If you hate home so much, go ahead and hate it. But I'm going to take your wife." But there was still considerable ground to be covered before their exchange could go that far. Daisuke tried once more to reach Hiraoka from the outside. "When you first came back to Tokyo, I got a lecture from you, right? And that I should do something?" "Right. And I was told your negative philosophy and was shocked." Daisuke thought it was probably true that Hiraoka had been shocked. At the time, Hiraoka was like a feverish man driven by thirst of action. What did he crave as a result of that action? Was it wealth, fame, power? If not these, was he seeking action for his own sake? Daisuke could not tell. People like me, who are spiritual bankrupts, can't help having ideas like that. Anyway, it's not as if ideas exist first and people conform to them second. The first come to the individual, then the ideas suited to him. So my theory applies only to me. I didn't intend it to cover your fate at all. I admired your spirit. You are a man of action, just as you said. I hope you will really do something." "Of course I intend to," was Hiraoka's only response. Daisuke inwardly shook his head. You intend to do it in the newspaper business? Hiraoka hesitated for an instant. Then he firmly declared, as long as I'm in the newspaper business, that's where I intend to do it. That certainly makes sense. I'm not asking you about your whole life, so that's a perfectly good answer. But I wonder, can you really do anything interesting in the newspaper business? I'm planning on it, replied Hiraoka tersely. So, their conversation had only advanced on an abstract plane. Sure, Daisuke had understood the meaning of Hiraoka's word, but he had yet to get to the heart of the man. He felt as if he were talking to a high government official or perhaps a lawyer. At this point, he resorted to calculated flattery. The example of war hero Lieutenant Colonel Hirose. Okay, don't judge me on how I pronounce lieutenant or lieutenant. Okay, there's a lot of ways to pronounce that. Figured prominently in it when the Lieutenant Colonel Hirose fell back during a blockade in the Russo-Japanese War. The people of the time idolized and even revered to him as a war hero. But now, some 4 or 5 years hence, when the name of Lieutenant Colonel Hirose scarcely found its way to people's lips, thus was the rise and fall of heroes meteoric. This was because in many cases the term hero designated one who was of sizable importance to a given age. Although the word itself sounded glorious, it actually indicated something extremely practical. Consequently, once the period of importance was over, the society set about stripping the hero of his medals. In the midst of war with Russia, the blockade troops might have been important enough, but with the restoration of peace, a hundred Lieutenant Colonel Hiroses made no difference than a like number of common mortals. Just as people were fickle towards their neighbors, so they were with their heroes. Thus, even among idols, there was a continuous metabolic process, an ongoing struggle for survival. Daisuke had not slightest yearning to join the ranks of heroes, but if there were an ambitious, energetic young man somewhere, he would be far better off rejecting the momentary power of the sword for eternal power of the pen, for that would bring him more durable fame. The newspapers were a leading contributor to this end. Daisuke tried expounding this much, but the fact that it was all flattery to begin with, and that his words sounded so terribly youthful, made him lose interest. So much so that it seemed slightly comical to him. Hiraoka's only response was, well, thanks. He did not seem particularly annoyed, but on the other hand, it was evident from his answer that he was in no way moved. Daisuke was embarrassed to have somewhat underestimated him. It was his design to appeal his heart, and once that it was done, to shift and slide into the original topic of his household. But Daisuke had stumbled not far from the starting point of his circuitous and difficult course. That night, Daisuke ended up parting from Hiraoka without having gotten any further. To judge from the result of the meeting, he himself could not tell why he had called on Hiraoka at the newspaper office. It was even more puzzling from Hiraoka's point of view. He never managed to press Daisuke for the reason he had come to the office. Alone in his study the next day, Daisuke went over and over in his mind the proceedings of the previous evening. In the 2 hours they had spent together talking, the only time Daisuke had been relatively sincere with Hiraoka was when he was defending Michio. Even that was only a sincerity of motivation. The words he had actually used were arbitrary. Strictly speaking, they might as well be called lies. Even the motivation, which he had believed to be sincere, was after all but a means to save his own future. Hiraoka would certainly not have regarded it as forthright. As for the rest of the conversation, well, it was from the start a calculated program in which Daisuke had set out to lead Hiraoka from his original position into a trap designed to serve Daisuke's purposes. Consequently, he had been unable to do anything with Hiraoka. If he had been bold, if he had attacked his subject head-on without reserve, alluding directly to Michio, then he could have said stronger things. He could have shaken Hiraoka more. He could have penetrated further into his heart, no doubt. But if he had failed, it would have been troubling. It would have meant troubling Michio. It would have meant fighting with Hiraoka, perhaps. Daisuke found it cowardly of himself that he had unconsciously adopted a safe but ineffectual course with Hiraoka. If it was true that he had been dealing with Hiraoka from such a position, though all the while unable to trust him for even 1 minute with Michio's fate, then in that case, he was guilty of flagrant contradiction inadmissible by the rules of reason. Daisuke envied the men of old, though they were actually motivated by self-interest. The muddiness of their reasoning enabled them to weep, to feel, to agitate, all the while convinced that it was for the sake of others, and in the end, to effect what they had originally desired. If only his head were as muddy, he might have put on a greater show of emotions last night and reaped more gratifying results. People, especially his father, said that Daisuke was a man without ardor. But according to his own analysis, the truth was as follows. Human beings were not so consistently lofty, sincere, and pure of motive and deed as to be worthy of ardor. Indeed, they were far more lowly creatures. To meet their lowly motives and deeds with ardor was the behavior of one who possessed an indiscriminating infantile mind, or a charlatan who feigned ardor in order to elevate his own position. Hence, Daisuke's coldness, even if it could not be considered another step in human evolution, was at least the result of an improved analysis of a man. Because he was accustomed to scrutinizing his own motives and deeds and discovering in them such craftiness, such insincerity, and in general such deceitfulness, he could never bring himself to pursue them with ardor. This was what he firmly believed. Here he came upon a certain dilemma. Was he to allow his relationship with Michio to develop in a straight line, as nature commanded, or on the contrary, ought he to return to the innocent past? Unless he chose one or the other, his existence would be as good as lose all meanings, he thought. All the other intermediate courses began in fraud and would inevitably end in fraud. They were safe as far as society was concerned and ineffectual as far as he was concerned, so he thought. To let his relationship with Michio ripen as heaven willed, he could only think of it as the will of heaven, was a socially dangerous course, as he was well aware. A love that obeyed the will of heaven but violated the laws of man was customarily accepted by society only upon the death of its subjects. Daisuke tried to picture the ultimate tragedy befalling the two, and shuddered in spite of himself. He also tried, on the other hand, to imagine eternal separation from Michio. In that event, he would have no choice but to become a martyr to his own will rather than to heaven's. As a means to this end, he thought of the marriage being urged upon him by his father and sister-in-law, and he thought that in acceding to the marriage, he would be giving new start to all his relationships. And that was chapter 13. Alright, that's pretty good. Alright, 1, one short break and I'll be right back. Yeah, I don't know how many chapters I can read today. Probably just two. Yeah. It's okay. I'll probably be able to finish end of this month. I can probably stream a few more, maybe one more time this month. Anyway. T. Alright. Hope everyone's been doing well. Yep. Yeah. I really need to finish this book. How many chapters left? 14, 15, and 16. And 17 was the last one. So I can read probably one more chapter. Then after that, I'm going to leave 15 to 17 to the next stream. Yeah. I would love to be like before, like, you know, in the olden time when I would stream for 3-4 hours. I can't anymore. I'm getting old. I can actually, but it's just I think it would be more like I treasure my rest time much more now. Like previously I have a lot of time. I don't have so much time anymore. So even reading 2 chapters in like an hour and a half stream would be good enough, I hope. Not that anyone is like watching this stream like live anyway, so most of my viewers come from YouTube. And yeah guys, by the way, go hang out, go to my YouTube channel and click subscribe. Yeah, because it would be nice to make some crumbs from YouTube, but I can't make anything now because I don't have 500 subscribers. I really need. I'm halfway there. I have 250 now, but it would be nice if I can get 500 subscribers there. Then I can make some little, you know, $1 or $2. Yeah. 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 I'm really happy with how well some of the videos are doing on my YouTube channel. The algorithm are quite good on some of the videos, and I wish that I can make more videos more regularly, I guess, but it's been a bit difficult. Yeah, I just noticed that I didn't even stream the whole month of February. It's a short month, and also I was really busy, so I wanted to stream one of those days, but I didn't. I should have, but I didn't. I was too lazy. Anyways, thanks. We shall continue chapter 14. Alright. One sip of tea. Some water. And we shall continue chapter 14. Okay, let's change to this side. Alright, currently we are reading Natsume Sōseki's and then それから chapter 14. To become a child of nature, or a man of will, Daisuke was at a loss. As a matter of principle, he loathed the absurdity of shackling himself like a machine. He, who responded instantly even to heat and cold, to a rigid, inflexible policy. At the same time, he was acutely aware that he had arrived at a juncture where he risked having to make a crucial decision. He had been told to give careful thought to the marriage issue, but he had still not taken the time to consider it in earnest. Once he got home, he had been thankful to have escaped the lion's dens once again and had left the matter at that. His father had not pressed him yet but he had a feeling that he would be called to Aoyama within 2 or 3 days. Daisuke, of course, did not plan to do anything until he was actually summoned. Once there, he could study his father's countenance and compose a suitable answer on the spot. Daisuke did not necessarily mean to be contemptuous of his father. All responses, he thought, should flow spontaneously from a consideration of oneself and the other party to the discussion. If he had not felt that his attitude towards Michio had been pushed to the brink, Daisuke would undoubtedly have adopted discourse with his father. But now, regardless to his father's countenance, Daisuke would have to cast the die in his hand. Whether the face turned out to be inconvenient to Hiraoka or disagreeable to his father, as long as he was going to cast the die, he had no choice but to obey the laws of heaven. As long as he was going to hold the die in his hand, and as long as he had been fashioned so as to be able to cast the die, then it had to be he and he alone who would determine the die's face. Daisuke decided in his heart that the final authority rested with him. Neither his father or his brother nor his sister-in-law nor Hiraoka appeared on the horizon of decision. He was a coward only where his own fate was concerned. He spent 4 or 5 days gazing at the die on his palm. It was still on his grasp today. He wished that fate would rush in from the outside and tap his hand lightly. Yet, on the other hand, the realization that he could continue to hold it in his hand gladdened him enormously. From time to time, Kadono came into the study. Each time he entered, Daisuke was sitting still at his desk. Once or twice he said, "How about going for a walk? It's not good for your health to study like this all the time." True, his color was not good. As it had turned summer-like, Kadono drew a bath for him every day. Whenever he entered the bathroom, he spent a long time gazing in the mirror. His beard was heavy, and even the slightest neglect made it appear terribly unsightly to him. Where he touched and felt the roughness, it was even more unpleasant. He continued to take his meals as usual, but the insufficient exercise, irregular sleep, and mental strain produced some disorder in his eliminatory functions. Daisuke thought nothing of it. He scarcely had time to consider physical disorders, so preoccupied was he with one thing, circling it again and again in his mind. Once this had become habitual, it was easier to spin around it forever than to make the effort to break loose. In the end, Daisuke came to abhor himself for his indecision. Since it was inevitable, why not refuse the match with Sagawa's daughter in order to force his relationship with Michio to develop? When he came this far in his thinking, he was startled in spite of himself. But the idea of acceding to the match as a means of severing his ties with Michio never once appeared in the course of his mental revolutions. As for refusing the match itself, he could resolve on that any number of times, but once he refused, the inexorable force which could be appeased only by throwing himself upon Michio was sure to set in as a reaction, and Daisuke became fearful again. Daisuke waited expectantly for his father to press him, but there was no word from him. He thought of going to see Michio again, but he did not have that much courage either. Finally, he began to think that although marriage might sever his ties with Michio insofar as the conventions of morality were concerned, it would be in no way influence them as far as the substance of morality went. If the relationship was able to develop with Michio already married to Hiraoka, why should the added circumstance of his being married signify its end? To see it as not continuing was but the public view, yet conventions, which were powerless to fetter the hearts, could only increase in painfulness if multiplied. So Daisuke reasoned. He had no choice but to reject the match. The day after the decision was made, Daisuke had his hair trimmed and his beard shaved for the first time in many days. During the first 2 or 3 days of the rainy season, it had rained in torrents, so that now all that was dust-like had settled quietly on earth and the branch of trees. The sun's color was paler than it had been. The rays that fell from the reefs on the cloud were softened, as if they had lost half of their reflective power because of the dampness of the earth. Looking at himself in the barber shop mirror, Daisuke stroked his cheeks, as plump as ever, and the thought that today he was embarking on a positive existence at last. When he arrived in Aoyama, he found 2 rickshaws parked at the entrance. One driver, waiting for his mate, had fallen asleep leaning against the running board and did not notice Daisuke as he went by. In the living room, Umeko sat with a newspaper on her lap, staring absently at the crowded green in the garden. He seemed too drowsy. Daisuke abruptly sat down in front of her. "Is father home?" Before she would reply, Umeko studied Daisuke's appearance with the air of an inspector. "Dai-san, haven't you lost a little weight?" "No, I don't think so," he replied. "But your color isn't good." Umeko drew her eyes together and peered at Daisuke's face. "It's because of the garden. I'm just getting the reflection from all the green." He looked out at the thick growth in the garden and added, "That's why you look pale too." "I haven't been feeling well for the past 2 or 3 days. No wonder you look so blank. Is something the matter? Do you have a cold?" "I don't know what it is, but I keep yawning all the time." With those words, Umeko let the newspaper slide from her lap and clapped for the maid. Daisuke inquired once more as to his father's whereabouts. Umeko had already forgotten the question. It turned out that the rickshaws at the entrance had brought their father's guest. Daisuke thought he would wait until they had left if it would not be too long. His sister-in-law got up, saying that she wanted a splash of water on her face to clear her head. The maid brought in a deep dish of fragrant arrowroot rolls. Daisuke dangled one of the sweets by the tail and sniffed it. When Umeko returned looking refreshed, Daisuke was swinging the roll like a pendulum. This time he asked, "How has Seigo been?" Umeko, as if she felt obliged to answer such a trite question immediately, stood for some time on the veranda gazing at the garden. Then she observed, "See how the color of the moss has come out with the rain." With this uncharacteristic remark, she returned to her original seat and shot back, "What about your brother?" When Daisuke repeated his question, she answered quite carelessly, "How is he?" "Well, he's as he always is, of course." "Does he still stay out all the time?" Yes, day and night. He's hardly ever home." "Don't you get lonely then?" "Why should you bother to ask a thing like that now?" Umeko began to laugh, whether it was because she thought Daisuke was teasing her or that it was all much too childish. Umeko hardly took notice of him. Daisuke, for his part, when he reflected on his usual self, was rather surprised that he had put such a question seriously. For all the years he had been witnessing his brothers and sister-in-law's relationship, he had never noticed this point. Nor had Umeko ever behaved so as to suggest to Daisuke that she found anything wanting. "I wonder if that's how most couples get along," he said as if to himself, since he did not particularly expect an answer from Umeko. He did not even look at her, but let his eyes fall to the newspaper on the floor. Then Umeko responded sharply, "What did you say?" When Daisuke's eyes, startled by her voice, directed themselves at her, she said, "So when you have a wife, why don't you stay home all the time and lavish affection on her?" Then Daisuke realized for the first time that he was with Umeko and that he was not his usual self. He made an effort to assume his normal manner.
But his mind continued to dwell on on the refusal of the proposed match and the relationship with Michio that was sure to ensue. Therefore, in spite of his resolve to return to his normal self and chat with Umeko, strange notes, unexpected to her, kept straying into the conversation without his notice. Finally, Umeko said, "Daisa, something's wrong with you today." Daisuke had on hand any number of ways to deflect his sister-in-law's words so as to avoid having to give direct response. Today, however, he was reluctant to employ them. They seemed both hypocritical and bothersome. So instead, he implored rather earnestly that she tell him in what ways that he was strange. His question was so silly that Umeko gave him an odd look. But Daisuke only grew more insistent. So with the preface that in that case, she would begin listing examples of the ways in which he was strange. Daisuke assumed that Umeko was deliberately pretending to be serious. Eventually, she came up with, "And when you say things like, 'With my brothers out all the time, you must be lonely,' well, that's too thoughtful." Then Daisuke interposed, "No, you see, there's a woman I know who is in that position and she seems so unhappy that I just felt like asking another woman how she felt. I didn't mean to make fun of you in any way." Is that true? Who is this person?" I can't tell you who. I can't really tell you her name." "Well, then, why don't you talk to her husband and tell him to pay more attention to her?" Daisuke smiled. "Do you think so too?" "Why, of course." "What if the husband won't listen to me?" "Well, then that cannot be helped. You just leave them alone?" "What else is there to do?" "Does the woman still have to fulfill her wifely duties?" "You really try to push with logic, don't you?" "Well, I suppose that would also depend on the degree of the husband's unkindness." "What if there's someone that the wife likes?" "I don't know." "How foolish! If there's someone she likes, why doesn't she go there in the first place?" Daisuke fell into silent thought. Presently he said, "Umeko-san." Startled by the depth of his voice, Umeko looked at his face anew. Daisuke continued in the same tone, "I'm going to refuse this match." The hand that held the cigarette trembled slightly. Umeko, on the other hand, heard his words with a face drained of expression. Daisuke proceeded, unmindful of her manner. "I've caused you a great deal of trouble over this business of marriage, and am now making you worry over this match. As you say, I'm 30 now and should be willing to go along with your recommendations at a reasonable point. But I have some thoughts on the matter, and I would like to refuse this match as well. I'm sorry about my father and brother, but it cannot be helped. It isn't that the woman in question doesn't suit me, but I'm going to refuse. The other day, father told me to think over carefully, and I have. But it still seemed better to refuse, so that's why I'm going to say no. To tell you the truth, that's why I came over today to see father about this, but he seems to be busy with company. I shouldn't say this incidentally, but I've taken advantage of this opportunity to tell you about it too." Because Daisuke's manner was serious, Umeko heard him out without her usual frivolous interruptions. But when he was finished, he expressed her own views. Her words were extremely simple, brief, and to the point. "But father will be troubled. I will tell father myself so you don't have to worry. But the talks have come so far. No matter how far they may have come, I never once said that I would marry her." "But you have never said that you wouldn't. That's why I came here for today." Then Daisuke and Umeko, sitting face to face, fell silent. Daisuke felt that he had said all that needed to be said to Umeko. One moment, please. Sorry. Omeko had many things. Sorry. Wait. Where was I? Omeko had many things to say and many to ask, but her lips could not form the words to logically connect his thoughts with what had happened. With what had preceded, sorry. Finally, she said, I don't know myself how far the talks have advanced without your knowledge, but no one expects you to refuse so flatly at this point. Why is that? Daisuke's tone was coldly composed. Umeko frowned. Why? But it isn't a question of logic. It doesn't matter if it's logical, please tell me why. If you're going to refuse as many times as you have, it doesn't make any difference in the end, does it? She explained. But her meaning was not immediately clear to Daisuke. He lifted uncomprehending eyes at her. Umeko began to expand on her true meaning. In other words, even you plan to get married one day, don't you? Even if you don't want to, it cannot be helped. If you keep on being so selfish, it just causes further problems. And so, well, no matter whom we find, she wouldn't suit you. So what I want to say is that it really doesn't make any difference whom you marry. No matter whom we show you, it doesn't do any good. There's not a single person alive in this world who would suit you. That's why you should just accept a wife who isn't meant to be pleasing in the first place and get married. What other choice is there? If you're just quietly marry the one we think is best, then everything would be nicely settled. True, maybe, father isn't consulting you on everything this time, but from his point of view, that's only natural. If he didn't do it this way, he would never leave to see your bride's face. Daisuke listened patiently to to her sister-in-law's words. Even when they came to an end, he would not open his mouth readily. He thought that if he were to refute her statements, things would only become more complicated and his meaning would never penetrate Umeko's ears. Still, he had no intention of agreeing with her argument. He believed that practically speaking, to do so would only put both of them in a difficult situation. So he turned to his sister-in-law and said, I understand your point, but I have my thoughts too, so please leave me alone. His tone naturally betrayed the feeling that he found Umeko's interference bothersome. But Umeko's would not stay silent. Of course, Dani-san, since you aren't a child, it's only natural that you should have some serious ideas of your own. I am sure that an ask for advice from someone like me is only a nuisance to you, but so I won't say any more. But try putting yourself in father's place. Every month he gives you as much as you say you need, so that means you are more of a dependent than in your student days. You are willing to take his help just as before, but now that you are grown up, you're not willing to listen to him. How can you expect anyone to accept that? Umeko's tone was becoming heated and she was about to pour out more words than Daisuke cut in. But if I had a wife, I would have to depend on father even more, wouldn't I? But that's fine, since father says that he would like it that way. Then father's determined to have me get married, even if it's to a woman who doesn't suit me at all. It would be one thing if there were a woman to your liking, but we couldn't find one we couldn't find one like that if we walk all over Japan. How do you know? Umeko turned a steadfast gaze upon Daisuke, and then she said, You talk like a lawyer, don't you? Daisuke drew his pale forehead towards his sister-in-law. Umeko-san, there is a woman I like, he said in a low voice. There were many times in the past Daisuke had made such confessions in jest to Umeko. At first, Umeko had taken him seriously. There had even been comical instances that when she had gone behind his back to probe into the matter. Once he had learned the truth, Daisuke, a woman that I like, had no effect on her whatsoever. If Daisuke tried to use it, Umeko would take no notice, or else she would tease him. Daisuke had perfectly satisfied with that. Daisuke had been perfectly satisfied with that, but in this case was unlike all the others. His facial expression, his eyes, the power concentrated in the depths of his low voice, everything that had preceded and brought him to the point, all of these things could not but startled Umeko. Daisuke's few words fell on her like a gleaming dagger. Daisuke took his watch from his obi. His father's guest seems unlikely to leave soon. The sky was beginning to cloud over again. He thought it would be wiser to draw for now and come back another time to settle the matter. He started to rise, saying that I'll come again. I think it would be better to see father another time. In that space of time, Umeko recovered herself. Being a nature in that sincerely insisted upon of taking others to the end, she was not a woman to abandon things midstream. She all but held Daisuke and asked the woman's name. Daisuke, of course, would not answer. Umeko insisted. Daisuke still would not accede. Then Umeko began to ask why he didn't marry the woman. Daisuke replied simply that he didn't because he couldn't. In the end, Umeko began to weep. He had thwarted her efforts to help him, she accused. Why hadn't he confided in her from the start, she reproached. Then all of a sudden she became sympathetic. She felt sorry for him, she said. Still, Daisuke would say nothing about Michio. Umeko finally gave in. As he was leaving, Umeko asked, "Then you're going to tell father about it yourself? I suppose it would be better if I said nothing?" Daisuke himself could not tell whether it would be better for her to be silent or for her to say something on his behalf. "Well," he hesitated, then continued, "I'm going to say no anyway, so..." and look at his sister-in-law's face. Then if it seems better to say something, I'll speak to him. But if it doesn't look promising, then I won't say anything, and you can tell him everything from the beginning. That would be better," said Umeko kindly. "I'll leave it to your judgment," Daisuke said and stepped outside. When he came to the corner, he took Shiocho's streetcar on purpose, thinking that he would walk from Yotsuya. As he passed the military parade grounds, the heavy clouds in the west parted, and the setting sun, an unusual sight in the rainy season, cast scarlet rays over the wide field. They fell on the wheels of the rickshaw moving in the distance, so that each time the wheels turned, they gleamed like steel. The rickshaw looked small in the middle of the distant field. The field was wide enough to make it look small. The sun's rays were garish like blood. As he watched the scene from an angle, Daisuke was swept away by the train that tore through the air. His heavy head felt giddy. By the time he got to the terminal, whether it was because his mind had attacked his body or because his body had attacked his mind, he felt an unpleasant sensation that made him anxious to get off as quickly as possible. The umbrella he had carried in case of rain now served as a cane as he dragged it along. As he walked, he murmured inwardly that today he had of his own accord as good as destroyed half his life. Up to now, with his father and sister-in-law, he had gently pushed away at moderate intervals. This time, he would have to reveal his true self and not get his way at all. At the same time, there was little hope of gaining the satisfactory result that he had attained before. There was, however, still room for him to retreat. But to do that, he would unquestionably have to deceive his father. Daisuke inwardly sneered at his past. He wanted to desperately recognize with that today's confession he had destroyed half his life, and on the strength of that shock, to throw himself before Michio and appeal to her with all his passion. He wanted to prepare his own position so that next time he saw his father, he would not be able to take a single step back. Therefore, he was deeply fearful of being called before, so he could have another meeting with Michio. He regretted having told his sister-in-law to use her discretion to conveying his intention to his father. If she should tell him tonight, he might even be called tomorrow morning. In that case, he would have to see Michio tonight and declare himself. But since it was night, he decided that it would be inconvenient. Before he came to the bottom of Tsunokami, the sun was about to set. From the military academy, he walked straight towards the moat, and after 2 or 3 blocks, when he should turn to Sadaharacho, Daisuke deliberately followed the streetcar track. He could not bear to go home as usual and passed the night idly in his study. Across the moat, upon the high banks, the pine trees formed a black line as far as the eyes could reach, and at the base of the streetcars passed to and fro. Daisuke derived a measure of gaiety from seeing the rapidity from which see from seeing the rapidity with which the small light boxes slid effortlessly over the rails to and fro. On the other hand, the outer moat line that ran relentlessly along the same tracks he was following seemed noisier and more hateful than usual. By the time he arrived in Ushigome Mitsuke, he could detect a few flickering lights in the distant woods of Koishikawa. Without a thought of eating dinner, Daisuke began walking in Michio's direction. Some 20 minutes later, he climbed Andozaka and came out before the burnt ruins of Dentsuin. He went beneath the tall trees that spread their branches on either side and turned left to come out by Hiraoka's house. A light glimmered through the wooden walls as usual. Daisuke pressed himself against the wall and strained his ears, and for a while there was not a single sound. All was quiet within the house. Daisuke thought of entering the gate and calling from outside the grating, but just at that moment, someone slapped his shin near the veranda. Then the person seemed to get up and walk inside. Presently, people could be heard talking. It was hard to make out what they were saying, but the voices were unmistakably those of Hiraoka and Michio. The conversation died out in a while. Then footsteps approached the veranda again, and with a resounding thump, someone sat down. Daisuke withdrew from the wall. He began to walk in the opposite direction from which he had just come. At first, he was in a daze, not knowing where or how he walked. The scene he had just witnessed and danced furiously in his mind as if it would burn itself in. When that had subsided somewhat, he felt unspeakable humiliation over his own conduct. He asked himself why he had engaged in such vulgar acts and then fled as if surprised in the midst of it. He stood in a dark lane and rejoiced to himself that the world was about to be conquered at night. The heavy air of the early summer closed in on him, and with every step he took he felt as if he would suffocate. Then he came to the stop at the Kagurazaka. His eyes were suddenly blinded. Countless human forms developed his body, and countless lights burned his head without mercy. Daisuke went up to Waradana as if he were fleeing. When he got home, Kadono met him with his usual aimless look and asked, "It's pretty late, sensei. Have you had dinner yet?" Since he did not want to eat, Daisuke replied that he had and shut Kadono out as if to drive him away. But before 2 or 3 minutes were, he clapped his hand and called him back. "There wasn't a messenger from home?" "No." "Then that's fine," was all he said. Give me 1 second, okay? Okay. One sip of tea. Kadono continued to stand in the doorway as if vaguely dissatisfied. Sensei, does that mean you didn't go home? Why? Why? Daisuke's face was ill-humored. Why? You said something like that as you were leaving. Daisuke found it tiresome to keep talking to Kadono. I did go home. If they haven't sent a messenger, that's fine, isn't it? Kadono answered non-committally. Is that right? And went out. Soka. Daisuke, knowing that his father was more impetuous where he was concerned than with anything else in the world, had questioned Kadono because he was afraid that the old man might have sent a messenger on his wheels. When Kadono had retired to the houseboy's room, he decided that he had to see Michio the next day. As he lay that night, Daisuke pondered the way in which he should arrange his meeting with Michio. If he sent a letter by rickshaw driver to fetch her, she would probably come. But given the discussion he had just had with his sister-in-law, there was no guarantee that he would not be visited even the next day by his brother or sister-in-law. On the other hand, the thought of seeing Michio at Hiraoka's house was painful to him. He decided that there was no choice but to meet at a place unrelated to both of them. In the middle of the night, it began raining hard. The muffled roar that enveloped the house made the mosquito netting look cold and out of place. Daisuke lay in the midst of the noise, waiting for the night to end. The rain did not clear until the next day. From the damp veranda, Daisuke stared up at the dark sky and once again changed the plans he had made the night before. It was distasteful for him to call Michio to a common tea house to talk to her. For want of anything better, he had even thought of meeting her under the blue sky, but given the weather, there was little hope for that. From the start, he was disinclined to go to Hiraoka's house himself. He concluded that the only choice left was to bring Michio to his own house. Kadono would be something of a nuisance, but he thought that they could manage so that the conversation would not carry into the houseboy's room. Until shortly before noon, he sat, gazing absently in the rain. As soon as he had finished his lunch, he flung on a rubber raincoat and went out. He walked in the rain to the bottom of Kagurazaka, and there called his home in Aoyama. He took the initiative to announce that he planned to come over the following day. It was his sister-in-law who came to the telephone. She had not yet told father anything, so wouldn't Daisuke think it over carefully again? With his thanks, Daisuke pushed the button and hung up. Next, he rang the number of Hiraoka's newspaper office to find out if Hiraoka had reported to work that day. He received the answer that he had indeed. Daisuke made his way once more up the hill in the rain. He entered a flower shop and bought a good many large white lilies, and with these in hand went home. He divided the still dripping flowers and placed them in 2 vases. Then he filled some large bowl he had used before, cut the stem short on the remaining lilies, tossed them in. When that was done, he sat at his desk and wrote Michio a letter. His message was exceedingly brief. He only said that since there was something he urgently wished to talk to her about, would she please come? Daisuke clapped and called for Kadono. Kadono appeared sniffing loudly. He took the letter and said, "It smells awfully good in here, doesn't it?" "You are to take the rickshaw and bring her back, all right?" Daisuke emphasized. Gazing at the white lilies, Daisuke abandoned himself to the powerful scent that enveloped the room. In this scent, he distinctly recognized Michio's past. And inseparable from that past, the shadow of his own past lay coiled up like smoke. Presently, he said in his heart, "Today, for the first time, I am returning to the past which belonged to the nature." When he was able to say this, he felt a peace pervade his entire being, such as he had not known in recent years. Why could he not have returned sooner, he thought. Why had he tried to resist nature at all, he thought? In the rain, in the lilies, in the now revived past, he saw life of pure unadulterated peace. There was no selfish in this life, either on its face or on its back, no gain or loss, no oppressive morality. Only the free floating clouds and nature flowing like water. All was blissful, and all was beautiful. Presently he awoke from his dream. Daisuke was suddenly seized by the eternal anguish spawned by that instant bliss. His lips lost their color. He gazed at himself in silence. The blood flowing beneath his fingernails seemed to quiver violently. He stood and walked over the lilies. He drew his face close so that his lips all but touched the petals, and he drew in the scent until he was dizzy. He wanted to move his lips from flower to flower and smother himself in sweet scent until he fainted and fell to the floor in the middle of the room. Presently he folded his arms, paced back and forth between the study and the living room. His heart throbbed without ceasing. From time to time he came to the corner of the chair or the front of his desk and stopped, and then began walking again. The agitation of his mind would not allow him to rest for long in one spot. At the same time he had stopped at random points in order to deliberate. The time gradually wore on. Daisuke never lost sight of the hands of the clocks. Occasionally he peered out in the rain beneath the eaves. It was still falling straight from the sky, which had become somewhat darker than before. Most of the clouds had gathered in one place, swirled in an eddy, and looked suspiciously ready to descend upon the earth. At that moment they sucked through the gate, and a rickshaw glistening with rain. When the sound of the wheels overwhelming the rain echoed in Daisuke's ear, his pale cheeks betrayed a smile, and he put his right hand to his heart. Michiyo followed Kadono from the entranceway along the veranda. In her navy blue and white cotton print kimono with an arabesque obi, she looked so different from the last time that Daisuke, at first glance, felt something new. Her color, as usual, was not good, but she came to the doorway and stood face to face with Daisuke. Her eyes, her brows, and mouth ceased all their activity and became rigid. As she stood at the threshold, she gave the impression that even her legs were rooted. From the moment she had seen the letter, Michiyo had of course anticipated something. In that anticipation were mingled fear and joy and anxiety. In the space from stepping from the rickshaw and being shown to the living room, Michiyo's face had overflowed with the colors of anticipation. Then, her expression had come to an abrupt halt. Daisuke's manner was so intense that it had jolted her. Daisuke pointed to one of the chairs. Michiyo sat as she was told, and Daisuke took the seat opposite hers. The two sat facing each other for the first time, but for some time neither uttered a word. "You wanted to see me about something?" Michiyo asked presently. Daisuke only said, "Yes." With that, the two fell back to listening to the sound of the rain. "Is it something urgent?" Michiyo asked again. Daisuke said again, "Yes." The two could not talk lightly as they usually did. Daisuke was ashamed of the self that required the help of alcohol in order to declare itself. He had already resolved that when he bared his heart to Michiyo, he would have to be his own natural self. But now, seated formally opposite her, he found himself longing for a drop of alcohol. He thought of going, "Oh, hello, Ando. It's okay. Thank you for dropping by." Sorry. It's a very important scene right now. I have to read continuously. Sorry. "Is it something urgent?" Michiyo asked again. Daisuke said again, "Yes." The two of them could not talk lightly as they usually did. Daisuke was ashamed of the self that required the help of alcohol in order to declare itself. He had already resolved that when he bared his heart to Michiyo, he would have to be his own natural self. But now, seated formally opposite her, he found himself longing for a drop of alcohol. He thought of going to the next room where he could stealthily pour himself a glass of his customary whiskey. But in the end, he could not bear to come to that decision. Unless he could stand in the open air and broad daylight and make his declaration in his normal condition, he would not be his own true self. To erect a wall of drunkenness and become bold from its heights was, he could not help feeling, cowardly, cruel, and insulting. He had come to unable to adopt moral postures towards the practices of society, but in its place he intended that there be not a shred of immorality in his intentions towards Michio. Indeed, he could not have stooped to base, vulgar acts. There was not the room for it, so deeply did he love her. Still, ask what he wanted, he could not come forth immediately. Ask a second time, he still hesitated. The third time, he had no choice but to say, "Well, I'll get to it by," and lit a cigarette. Michio's face became increasingly pale each time the answer was postponed. The rain continued, long and thick, falling noisily. Because of the rain, because of the sound of the rain, the two were cut off from the world. They were even cut off from Kadono and the old woman who lived in the same house. Alone, the two were sealed in the scent of white lilies. "I went out and bought these flowers." Daisuke turned and looked around. Michio's face followed his and traveled once around the room. Then she took a deep breath with her nose. "I wanted to recall the days when you and your brother were in Shimizuzo. So I bought as many as I could," said Daisuke. "What a lovely scent!" Michio had been gazing at the large petals, wide open as if in flight, but when she turned her eyes to Daisuke, her cheeks were faintly flushed. "When I think of those days," she began, and stopped. "Do you remember?" "I remember. You wore bright colors and did your hair in a butterfly style." But that was just after I came to Tokyo. I quit doing it right away." "Weren't you wearing your hair like that when you brought the lilies the other day?" "Oh, you noticed? That was the only time." "You wanted to wear your hair like that then?" "Yes, it was just a fancy. When I saw your hair, it reminded me of those days." "Oh," said Michio bashfully. When Michio was in Shimizucho, it was after he and Daisuke had begun to talk easily. Daisuke had once complimented her on the hairstyles that she had worn when she first came from the country. At the time, Michio had smiled, but even when she had heard those words, she would never do her hair in the butterfly style again. The two remembered the incident well, but they did not raise it to their lips. Michio's brother had been generous and easygoing by nature, and the warmth of his companionship had endeared him to his friends. Daisuke had been especially close to him. The brother's own easygoing nature had made him particularly fond of his quiet, submissive sister. When he brought her out from the country, it was not at all from a sense of duty to educate her younger sister, but out of sympathetic concern for her future, and moreover the desire to keep her at his side for the present. Even before he sent for Michio, he had confided as much to Daisuke. At the time, Daisuke, like any youth, had responded to these plans with considerable curiosity. After Michio came, Daisuke and her brother had become even closer. As to which of them had advanced the pace of their friendship, Daisuke could not tell. Since the brother's death, whenever Daisuke looked back upon that period, he could not but recognize a certain significance in their intimacy. The brother failed to shed any light upon it before his death. Daisuke himself never ventured to disclose anything, and thus their thoughts remained secret and were buried away. If the brother had privately revealed his intentions to Michio during his lifetime, Daisuke was ignorant of it. It was only that he derived a special feeling from Michio's bearing and her speech. Even in those days, Daisuke presented himself to Michio's brother as a man of taste. Michio's brother Michio's brother did not have more than an average sensitivity. Whenever the conversation turned to deeper subjects, he frankly confessed that he did not understand and avoided needless argument. He once found the phrase arbiter elegantiarum somewhere and abused it by using it as a second name for Daisuke. Michio would sit in the next room listening intently to her brother's and Daisuke's conversation. He thus learned the term arbiter elegantiarum and once startled her brother by asking its meaning. Her brother had as good as completely delegated the education of Michio's taste to Daisuke. For the sake of his sister's mind, which turned to Daisuke's for enlightenment, he endeavored to make their opportunities for contact as frequent as possible. Daisuke did not refuse. Looking back, he even detected traces of his having assumed the responsibility voluntarily. Michio, of course, received his instruction gladly. In this way, the three spun together from month to month like three spokes in a wheel. Knowingly and unknowingly, the spokes drew closer and closer as the wheel turned. Just as they were about to merge into one ring, one of them disappeared, and the remaining two lost their equilibrium. Daisuke and Michio began to talk without reserve about their past of 5 years ago. As they talked, their present self receded into background and they slowly returned to their student days. The distance between them shrank to what it had been. If my brother hadn't died then, and were still alive and well, I wonder what I would be doing now. Michio seemed to be longing for the past. Do you mean that you would be a different person if your brother were alive? I wouldn't be a different person. How about you? It's the same with me. Then Michio said, almost reprovingly, Oh, that's not true. Looking intently at her, Daisuke answered, I have never changed then or now. He did not remove his gaze from her for some time. Michio averted her eyes immediately and said, almost as if to herself, But you were already changed then. Her voice was much too low to pass for an exchange in an ordinary conversation. Daisuke, as if stepping on a fleeting shadow, caught the tail end of her words. I haven't changed at all. It just seems that way to you. It can't be helped if it seems that way, but it's a misunderstanding. For his part, Daisuke spoke more earnestly and clearly than usual, and as if in self-defense. Misunderstanding or whatever, it doesn't matter. Without a word, Daisuke studied Michio's manner. Her eyes had been cast down from the beginning. Daisuke could easily see the trembling of her long lashes. You are necessary to my existence, absolutely necessary. It was because I wanted to tell you this that I had you come all the way over. Daisuke's words were unadorned by the sweet turns of an ordinary lover's speech. His tone, like his words, were plain and simple. It even verged on the severe. His using the pretext of urgent business to call Michio was all that smacked of childish poetry. But of course, Michio was a woman who could understand urgent business apart from its vulgar sense. Moreover, she had little interest in the adolescence phrases that appeared in popular novels. It was true that Daisuke's word did not offer anything dazzling to Michio's senses. It was also true that Michio did not thirst in that way. Daisuke's words bypassed her senses and penetrated her heart. The tears flowed from her trembling lashes down her cheeks. I want you to consent to these, please. Michio wept still more. She was utterly unable to respond to Daisuke. She took a handkerchief from her sleeve and put it to her face. Only a part of her dark brows and forehead and hairline was visible to Daisuke. Daisuke dragged his chair closer to Michio. You will consent, won't you? He said next to her ears. Michio still kept her face covered. Between sobs, a voice sounded from the handkerchief. It's too much. The words ran through Daisuke's like an electric current. From the bottom of his heart, he felt that his confession had come too late. If he was going to declare himself, he should have done it before Michio was married to Hiraoka. He could not bear to hear these few words of Michio that trickled alternately with her tears. I should have confessed this to you 3 or 4 years ago, he said glumly and pressed his lips together. Michio immediately removed the handkerchief from her face. She lifted her eyes from beneath their reddened lids and looked straight at Daisuke and began, "You didn't have to do that, but why?" And hesitated, but continued decisively, "Why did you let me go?" No sooner had she said this than she put the handkerchief to her face and again and wept. "It was wrong of me. Please forgive me." Daisuke grabbed Michio's wrist and tried to take the handkerchief from her face. Michio did not even try to resist. The handkerchief fell to her lap. Still looking at her lap, she said faintly, "It's cruel." The flesh on her small mouth quivered. "If you say that I am cruel, there's nothing I can say to that, but I have been punished accordingly." Michio lifted wondering eyes to his face. "How? It's been more than 3 years since you got married, and I'm still single." "But that's of your own choosing." "No, it's not my own choosing. Even if I think of marrying, I can't. I don't know how many times I have been pressed by my family to get married, but I have refused them all. I have just refused another match. As a result, I don't know what will happen between my father and me, but I don't care what happens. I'm going to refuse. As long as you are taking revenge on me, I have to refuse." "Revenge?" said Michio. Her eyes moved as if in fear of the word. "In spite of everything, there hasn't been a single day since I got married that I haven't hoped that you would get married as soon as possible," came her somewhat formal words. But Daisuke would not heed them. "No, I want you to take revenge on me as much as possible. That's what I truly want. Calling you over like this today, bearing my heart to you, I can only think as a part of your revenge too. Now, I've as good as committed a crime in the eyes of society, but this is the way I was born, so it was more natural for me to commit this crime. Even if society brands me a criminal, even if I do penance to you, then that's enough. I can think of nothing that would make me happier." For the first time, Michio smiled through her tears. Still, not a word came to her lips. Daisuke gained more time to unbosom himself. "I know it's cruel of me to tell you these things after all these years, but it cannot be helped. The more cruel I sound to you, the more it means I have succeeded with you. And that's what it amounts to. Besides, I have come to the point where I can't go on living without revealing these cruel facts. In other words, it's selfishness. That's why I'm apologizing." "It's not cruel, so please don't apologize anymore." Michio's tone had suddenly become clear, but it was still subdued. But compared to before, it was very calm. After a pause, she began, "If you had only spoken a little sooner," and tears gathered in her eyes. "Would you be happier if I had said nothing the rest of my life?" "No, that's not it," Michio denied forcefully. "If you hadn't spoken, I don't know if I could have gone on living either." It was Daisuke's turn to smile. "Then it doesn't matter." "It's not that it just doesn't matter. I'm grateful. Only, it's wrong to Hiraoka. Is that what you want to say?" Michio nodded uneasily. Daisuke asked, "Michio-san, tell me honestly, do you love Hiraoka?" Michio did not answer. The color drained visibly from her face. Her eyes and mouth became fixed. Everything about her communicated anguish. Daisuke asked next, "Then does Hiraoka love you?" Michio's eyes were still cast down. Daisuke, trying to supply a decisive conclusion to his own question, had already formed the words in his mouth when Michio suddenly lifted her face. The uncertainty of just moments ago had almost vanished from her face. Even the tears were nearly dry. Her cheeks were pale as usual, but her lips firm and showed no signs of trembling. From the midst came these low, heavy words, one by one as if they would not link together. "We have no choice. Let's make up our minds." Daisuke shuddered as if someone had showered him with cold water from behind. They sat facing each other. The two who were sure to be driven from society gazed into each other's souls as if they would bore into them. Presently, Michio, as if she had suddenly been seized by something, put her hands to her face and began to weep. Daisuke, unable to bear the sight of her weeping, leaned on his elbow and hid his forehead behind his 5 fingers. There they sat, immobile, a veritable sculpture of love. While they were still, they felt a tension of spirit as if they had seen 50 years compressed before their eyes, and together with tension, they did not lose sight of the realization they existed side by side. Together they received the punishment and blessing of love, and together they savored each other. Presently, Michio took her handkerchief and carefully wiped her tears away. Then she said quietly, "I'll be going home now." Daisuke answered, "Yes, go." The rain had become light, but Daisuke of course did not want to send her home alone. She deliberately did not hire a rickshaw but saw her back himself, whereas he normally would have accompanied her all the way to Hiraoka's house. He now parted from her at the Edogawa Bridge. He stood on the bridge and followed her with his eyes until she turned the corner. Then slowly walking back, he pronounced to himself, "It's all over." The rain lifted towards evening, and when night came, the clouds raced through the sky. The moon rose pure and white as if it had been washed. A long time, Daisuke gazed from the veranda at the moistened leaves and the garden flooded by moonlight, and in the end, he put his clogs and stepped down. The garden, not a spacious one to begin with, had a surprising number of trees, leaving room for Daisuke to walk. He stood in the middle and looked up at the vast sky. Then he got the lilies he had bought during the day and strewed them all around himself. The scattered white petals, bathed in the moonlight, became luminous. Some of them glimmered in the dark at the foot of the trees. For some time, Daisuke stayed in their midst, huddled over. He went in only when it was time to sleep. The scent of the flowers had not completely left the room. And that's the end of chapter 14. And that's where we are going to end today. Yeah, I had things to do, so I would have to attend to the thing. Sorry. Anyways, yep. Thanks, Ando, for dropping by. But it's okay. You don't have to stay long. We always have the bots to work with. And anyways, yes. I will get back to you as soon as possible. Hopefully, in the next week or so, or the next 2 weeks, and I'll get back to you soon. Oh my god, the horse. Yeah, I heard Year of the Horse, guys. Thank you for listening today. I'll see you on the other side, and the other side is YouTube. If this is the first time you guys listen to me, and if you like what I do, you can subscribe to me on YouTube, where you have hundreds of videos, basically, of reading sessions. Hundreds and hundreds, maybe 1,000 now, hopefully soon. And you will have, never-ending content to listen to when you're working or you're studying, or if I have a lot of comments saying that they have to study the book, they have to read the book for their high school or whatever, and I'm glad to be able to help you guys on your reading. And I'm sorry if I stumbled or I garbled words. Like I said, English is not my first language, but anyway, thank you so much for dropping by. Thank you so much for listening. As always, I'll see you guys the next time. Thank you. Bye bye. Have a good evening or morning or afternoon, wherever you are. Bye. I'll see you guys next time as soon as possible. Bye. Bye.